Road Rash was rebooted in 1994, with the first next-gen Rash premiering on the 3DO console. A PlayStation version was released a year later in 1995, and finally a Saturn version following in 1996. These are all effectively the same game. In addition to these, a Sega CD title of the same name was released in 1995. Today, I'll be looking at the Saturn and the Sega CD versions of this mid-90s classic. The Road Rash reboot brought in a fresh next-gen makeover with a ton of 90s attitude. In addition to the licensed rock soundtrack, there are detailed menus and a ton of full-motion video in both titles. These full-motion videos play before a race, after a race, in victory or defeat, and when getting busted by the cops. These videos are the same in both versions of Road Rash. The Sega CD, impressively enough, plays them in full screen rather than a small window, as was the norm for the platform. However, the frame rate is much lower, and there is a lot of dithering due to the system's low on-screen color limit. The Saturn videos look a lot better, with more colors and a higher frame rate. The menus in both games are the same as well, showing off a new art style. Again, the Sega CD version looks very dithered due to the color palette limitations. Oddly enough, the Saturn version expands on the different character names in comparison to the Sega CD version. All the names were simplified to just a single word. Slim Jim is now simply Slim. While the menus and presentation are the same for both games, once you start racing, it's pretty obvious these are entirely different games. Road Rash for the Saturn is a truly next-generation experience. The environments have evolved from a 2D line scrolling to a mixture of polygons and sprites. It's a hybrid of sorts, but for the most part delivers a believable world for such an early 3D title. Most background objects, the bikers, and traffic are all still 2D sprites, and I wouldn't be surprised if the road itself was a line scrolling effect. The lack of texture warping leads me to believe this just might be the case. In typical 90s fashion, the bikers and traffic have a digitized look, and I don't think it's aged all that well. The Sega CD Road Rash is not a new game at all, but rather a new coat of paint on the classic Sega Genesis game engine. This isn't a port by any stretch, it's quite literally a Genesis game released at the same time as the next generation titles. That's not to say it's bad though. I love the 16-bit Road Rash games, and this CD version carries on that legacy. The controls and combat are every bit as fun as the prior games. Even better, the licensed soundtrack actually plays during the races, which gives it a modern feel. This is in stark contrast to the Saturn Rash, which plays chiptunes during the races rather than the licensed music. The Saturn version does have superior sound. The bike engine noise is far less annoying than the whiny Sega CD version. The police sirens in the Saturn version are also a lot better. The Sega CD version sounds more like a dying cat than a siren. It's still disappointing the Saturn can't play the licensed music during the racing. It kind of seems like a waste to license music but not play it during the majority of the game. While the Sega CD Road Rash is a fun game, its disappointing Electronic Arts didn't take advantage of any of the extra horsepower. At minimum, it would have been nice to see some sprite scaling effects with the opponent's bikes and background objects. Instead, it's all billboarded onto the screen in a very choppy way. Road Rash effectively plays the same on both systems. There are 5 different locations spanning across the state of California. They are different enough, but the Saturn version is clearly better, with more convincing city locations and more detailed backgrounds. Despite sharing the same name and being released around the same time, these are 2 different games. I do enjoy them both quite a bit. The Sega CD version is a great 16-bit racer, just like its predecessors. The Saturn game is often argued as the highlight of the entire Road Rash franchise. The Saturn version is a great early 32-bit racer with a nice mix of polygons and sprites. If I had to choose the better game, it's no doubt the 32-bit Road Rash game. The menus, full motion video, sound effects, and updated game engine are all vastly superior to the 16-bit offering.